Good afternoon, and thank you for tuning in to Politics and the Pulpit here on your hometown station. We are on storm watch today, as we are going to have some rain overnight into the early morning hours, and then a big storm, supposedly, next Monday, Tuesday, and Wednesday. So I guess we'll do the standby and wait and see, but hopefully it'll all pan out in the end. This is your holy host, the Bishop of Santa Clarita, back for another opportunity to reprove, to rebuke, to exhort with all long-suffering and doctrine. We have another information-packed show for you today, and I hope that our subject matter, at least at the top of the hour, will be interesting to you, maybe even a bit challenging. However, joining the show at the bottom of the hour is U.S. Senate candidate Denice Gary-Pandol, who is running for the seat once occupied by the now deceased Dianne Feinstein. And folks, let me just make this clear, considering that we have now a vacated U.S. Senate seat here in California. We need, as conservatives, as Republicans, as Democrats with a brain, we need to do everything within our voting power to make sure there's a Republican as one of the two choices after our March 5th primary, and not two progressive, out-of-touch Democrats. In particular, one Democrat, Adam Schiff. By the way, I don't like Barbara Lee either, and I'm not into Katie Porter down in Orange County either. So, but of those three, Adam Schiff is the most egregious. But let's do our best to make sure that on March 6th we can wake up and say, wow, there's a Republican that we can vote for the U.S. Senate seat here in California. So looking forward to the conversation with Denice Gary-Pandol at the bottom of the hour, and she'll be calling in from her district up there in Kern County. Now, quick shameless plug. If you can't get enough of yours truly, which I'm sure there's plenty of you out there, then catch the Faith and Freedom Hour every Sunday right here on your hometown station at 8 a.m., where we run our services. It's not the live service, but we cut and splice previous services that we've had, and so you'll be able to listen to those every Sunday here on your hometown station on the Faith and Freedom Hour at 8 o'clock. Now remember, Freedom's Way Baptist Church is the church where woke Christianity goes to die. So listen in every Sunday if you can. Okay, topic at hand. This should be really interesting. I want you to listen closely. Why do Democrats even win elections in the first place? Considering that we are not very... When we listen to Democrats, we're thinking, why would anybody fall for the rhetoric that they're spewing? So again, why do Democrats even win elections in the first place? And what is the Democratic Party's secret sauce to winning elections at all? Now, some of you are probably shouting at the radio saying, because they cheat! And that may be, at least in some cases. And by the way, that's all verifiable. There have been some cases where cheating has happened. But there is something far more fundamental to Democratic victories that perhaps, maybe, you have not thought about. Now, it could be bad Republican messaging that's part of the problem. Now, I think as Republicans and as conservatives, we ought to be willing to concede that bad Republican messaging is part of the problem that is lending to these Democratic victories. In the last few election cycles, Republicans as a whole have been very inconsistent in terms of their messaging, especially since the overturning of Roe v. Wade, which is now, over 2 years old. Republicans have been completely hapless when it comes to messaging a abortion message. And so I do think the Democrats saw that weakness in Republican messaging and turned what was bandied about as the red wave of 2022 midterms into barely a red trickle. And perhaps the secret to Democrat victories could be bad Republican candidates who either refuse or distance themselves from the Trump team or the whole Make America Great Again agenda. We kind of saw that song and dance on full display last week during the U.S. Senate candidate debate, where baseball legend Steve Garvey couldn't answer whether he would or wouldn't vote for Trump. Now, as he continued on with his answer, it became very apparent that Garvey had voted for Trump twice already, and it's pretty clear that he's probably going to vote for Trump again. But because of the song and dance at his first ever U.S. Senate debate, you would think you would embrace the whole Make America Great Again movement and agenda, as opposed to somehow distancing yourself from it. And so I think many of us were probably very frustrated by Garvey's performance last week. Well, ironically, we'll have someone to ask about that here in a little bit, Denice Gary-Pandol, who, of course, she herself felt very frustrated by Garvey's performance. Now, as feckless as Republican messaging can be, and I'll be the first to concede, Republican messaging has not been great, and as feckless as some of the candidates running can be, I don't think those are the real reasons for Democrat victories. At least in my thinking. Now, they might be symptomatic, but they're not the primary cause. Because again, I don't think Democrat messaging is any better. I just think they're far more skilled and adept and have the media, of course, to echo all of those messagings that the Democrats are able to accomplish. But you say, all right, Pastor Cook, what do you think is the Democratic secret sauce for Democratic victories? Well, I'm going to give you my two reasons. Why do Democrats win? Number one, the 19th Amendment. And number two, low testosterone men. Translation, for those of you out there that are trying to think about what that means, women and men with weak testosterone levels. You're saying, this is comedy routine, preacher. No, it's not. This is why Democrats and Republicans, ironically, both target, if you will, white suburban women. And if you listen to our side, especially from the Wall Street Journal and some of the more squishy elements of the Republican Party, they always like to say that if we're going to win in the national elections, we're going to have to make sure that we woo and win over all the white suburban women. And if we don't, they're all going to go to the Democratic side. But, you know, Democrats usually, but not always, tend to have the edge when it comes to suburban women. And some of you are probably wondering, what does the 19th Amendment have anything to do with this? Well, this is probably a product of your public school education, but the 19th Amendment is where women got the right to vote because of women's suffrage. In 1919, women got the right to vote, and that was written into the bill for the 19th Amendment. Now, let me ask you a question, especially you women out there that are listening. How many of you were glad that Donald Trump won in 2016 against Hillary Rodham Clinton? And I'm sure many of you are saying, well, I'm totally glad that Donald Trump won. Can you imagine what the world would have looked like going into 2021 had Hillary won in 2016 and then either won re-election or Joe Biden ends up being the heir apparent? I don't know how that would have worked, but can you imagine? I mean, it's bad now with just 3 years and some change into the Biden administration, can you imagine just how much worse it would be had Hillary Clinton won in 2016? Well, then, if you were happy that Donald Trump won in 2016, then you have men to thank. You say, well, that's rather male chauvinistic. No, actually, it's not. If any of you have ever followed Nate Silver, and I'm not suggesting that he is like the oracle behind everything, but Nate Silver has done some pretty good stuff. Some things I don't necessarily agree with, but this has been pretty good. Nate Silver over at 538 did a study on the 2016 election where he concluded that if only women voted in the 2016 election, Hillary Clinton would have won that election with over 400 electoral delegates, with over 400 electoral votes. Nate also did a study concerning men. That is, if just men voted in 2016, then Trump would have won with over 400 electoral votes. In fact, according to Nate Silver's 538, if only men voted in every election, no Democrat would ever be elected, the study finds. I know. You're probably thinking, wow, what a paradise. Well, not necessarily, because we've had some pretty crummy Republicans, too. I mean, some of us out there think that, Trump was great. Some of us liked Ronald Reagan, but then we also had people like Gerald Ford, and we also had Richard Nixon, and we had a few others out there, at least in the most recent political history, right? But Nate Silver says if only men voted in every election, no Democrat would ever be elected. Now, why is this? Why is this? And I think most of you know this, because Democrats as a whole, as a party, they tend to appeal to emotions and not facts and not stats. They run as far as they can from facts and stats, or they will cherry pick the facts and the stats. But really, the Democrats are good at really appealing to the emotions, forming a narrative, and telling a story. Now, I'm not suggesting that that is by itself bad, but I'm just telling you that that's one of the secrets to why the Democrats win elections, especially with women. All right? And you say, why do you say it like that? Because God made the sexes different. I know we're in this funky time right now where, one group of people thinks there's 95 different, sexes out there. And but the fact is, if we believe the account in Genesis, which I do, and there's been no reason to discredit it, God made us male and female. And because the sexes are different, we ought to rejoice over that difference. Think about this when you were growing up. When you wanted mercy and when you wanted grace, you tended to run to mom. You would tend to run to mom. There are exceptions to the rule. I get it. I don't need the cards and letters here. But by and large, you ran to mom. Why? Because women tend to show more emotion and more mercy and extend more grace. And if you just wanted the job done and, wham, bam, spank you on the bottom, especially as you were growing up in an America that allowed that, then dad was the one that was going to do it. Remember what mom used to say if you grew up in a household like this? You wait until your dad gets home. Now again, I know there's exceptions to the rules. Some of you out there are listening, you might be single moms and you had to do it all, and God bless you. But in a normal household where there was a dad and a mom, if a child wanted grace and mercy extended, that person would appeal to mom first before appealing to dad. And you know what? Even though Democrats say they don't know the differences between men and women, or will play out to the fact that there's no differences at all, between men and women. The fact is the Democratic Party realizes the differences, and their messaging proves it. Completely proves it. In other words, the messaging of the Democratic Party going into general election cycles or even midterm election cycles proves they realize there's a difference between women and men, and what women accept on an emotional level and what men accept on an emotional level. Listen, I'm less emotional than my wife. This is no aha moment here. My wife is far more emotional than I am. If you're married, you realize your wife is far more emotional than you are. Again, I realize there's exceptions to the rules. Again, I don't need the cards and letters. But as a general rule, that is how God created us. Now, granted, I know plenty of women who are not as moved by emotions as other women are. But as a general rule, women tend to be more emotional. And women tend to be moved by stories and by narratives, and that is the primary messaging technique of the Democrats. Now, if you're a conservative woman and you're getting all flustered right now because I'm saying this, you know down deep I'm right. Now, if you're one of those exceptions that don't get moved by stories and narratives and you're just, a facts and stats kind of person, then amen, great, wonderful. That's why you're probably conservative and probably more likely a Christian as well. But generally speaking, folks, the Democratic Party totally realizes that women are more emotional and more moved, if you will, by stories and narratives, and that is the primary messaging technique of the Democrats. Now, there's another secret to the Democratic success. It's not just this notion of women being moved by emotion, the 19th Amendment. Low testosterone men also make up the secret sauce to Democratic victories. There was a study done about 15 years ago where progressive males who were politically extreme tended to have lower testosterone levels than traditional conservative married men. And by the way, let me just say something very quickly. Marriage as an institution is still a healthy thing, and those that are married tend to stay in relationships longer, have better relationships, have better family structures, have better financial structures altogether. Why? Because that's God's covenant. You get mad at me all you want, but that's just the way it is. But there was this study done about 15 years ago where progressive males who were politically extreme tended to have lower testosterone levels than traditional conservative married men. The study went on to say that when testosterone levels increased, in other words, testosterone levels were increased in progressive males, then they tended to shift more to conservative right. That's right. In other words, the lower the testosterone levels in the male, the more likely you were to be a leftist progressive nut job. The increase in testosterone levels made you more likely to be someone who would vote conservative. Now, some of you are probably yelling, saying, this is pseudoscience. However, I don't think it's pseudoscience at all. It is my conclusion, based both upon simple observation and studies, that the Democratic Party would never win an election if it were not for women and low testosterone men. Now listen, you come to your own conclusions based upon your own observations and your own studies. These are mine. That's why it's called Politics and the Pulpit, and your holy host is the guy running the show here. When we return, we'll be joined by U.S. Senate candidate Denice Gary-Pandol, who is running to keep Adam Schiff, Barbara Lee, and Katie Porter out of Sacramento when we come back here on your hometown station. All right, we're back here live on Politics in the Pulpit. This is your holy host, the Bishop of Santa Clarita, Pastor Jerry Cook. And we are privileged to have joined on the line with us this afternoon Denice Gary-Pandol, who's running to take back Dianne Feinstein's seat. And we want to send her to the Washington place. Denice, thanks for coming on the show today. Why are you uniquely qualified to take back this U.S. Senate seat, Denice?
Jerry, thank you so much for having me on your show. It is also an honor to be here with you and to speak to your audience. Why am I uniquely qualified? I think first and foremost, it's really important to get somebody in Washington, D.C. that's going to bring back Judeo-Christian values. As a committed, praying Christian who prays for the people of California and the nation, I think that's number one, first and foremost, an important and credible quality. But secondly, I'm the only candidate running for U.S. Senate that has had top secret clearances. I worked my way through life when I was working my way through graduate school and working on an advanced degree in international relations, political science. My core field especially was Middle Eastern affairs in grad school. And, you know, when you have top secret clearances and you go to work for a think tank, one of the things you do is you have to study problems that, let's say, the President of the United States, who reached out to the particular think tank I was hired to work for and said, you know, we want to know in Washington what you think is the best policy that we can pursue if XYZ happens. And then with those clearances, you begin to research top secret information, whether it's coming through CIA operatives out in the field around the globe, whether it's coming through other means of communication. You know, we have over 17, 18 intelligence agencies that work on these things to keep you safe, Jerry, and the people of California and the nation safe, and to keep us safe around the globe. So I'm the only U.S. senatorial candidate that's had that background. And one of the things, if I could help maybe clarify what thing I would like to do starting day one as your U.S. Senator is dealing with an often overlooked aspect of illegal immigration, and that's the role of the United Nations and these U.S. non-governmental organizations that are taking our tax dollars, Jerry, the taxpayer dollars of the people of this state and this nation, and they're spending, this Biden administration, the Democrats in Washington, are giving away tens of millions of dollars that go to these UN NGOs that are involved in kidnapping children, selling them in the slave trade here in America, actually in some cases raping and mutilating men, women, and children. And of course, we have a real problem with organs being harvested. So when you think about the millions of taxpayer dollars that are being spent on, for example, the United Nations High Commissioner for Refugees, the UN's International Organization for Migration, you know, it brings us to a place where we have to say we need to defund the United Nations. You know, one of the things I like to talk about, and I've been talking about, by the way, I'm the only candidate that's been working up and down the state of California, meeting with California voters for 2 years. I'm not this rhino, former baseball player that just jumped in October, November of this last year. I've actually been meeting people statewide. And one of the things that they've made clear is whether you're in Siskiyou County and you've got human trafficking going on and an illegal drug trade going on up there because people come here unlawfully from Canada as well. So you've got a problem up there. In fact, interestingly enough, the senior field rep for Congressman Lamalfa's office took me out there where a lot of the Hmong refugees, often many of them are here illegally, are actually involved in growing drugs illegally, and they don't have enough manpower up there in Siskiyou County to do anything about it. And now these illegals are contaminating the water supply. And they're getting absolutely no support from the state government, from Gavin Newsom's office, who's, the chief executive of the state of California, who's responsible for law enforcement in this state, getting absolutely no support at all. So I'd like to say to the people listening, Jerry, on your show today, that we don't need immigration reform. We need to defund the United Nations and the NGOs that are involved in human trafficking and abetting illegal immigration and costing the taxpayers billions. But we need to enforce the law. It's about time that you get a U.S. Senator in Washington that's going to withhold funding, federal dollars, to every state entity that doesn't enforce their laws at the border and is involved in sanctuary cities. We should not have sanctuary cities, and people that are in positions of power should be held accountable for being involved in sanctuary states, because that is a violation of Title 8, Section 1182. And Title 8, Section 1182 is federal law, and it states that no one can enter the United States illegally without proper documentation. It says that nobody can enter our country that's going to be a ward of the state. Think about all the money we spend in states around the country, feeding and transporting and housing and educating and providing proper medical care and dental care and everything else, because people coming here are a ward of the state. People that are coming here have committed crimes oftentimes or have ties to terrorism. So it's really important that we understand there's a network of more than 50 NGOs that are distributing millions to migrants and do not qualify for asylum.
Could you explain to our audience what an NGO is, by the way?
Non-government organization. There are non-governmental organizations that are being sponsored and supported by the Democrats. And these organizations oftentimes are working in direct connection with Mexican drug cartels, the Chinese Communist Party that's been involved in basically unrestricted warfare against the United States. I mean, think about all the chemicals that are used for people in Mexico, these drug cartels, to put together these fentanyl drugs that have murdered over 100,000 Americans in fiscal year 2022 alone. Think about that. So, again, as your U.S. Senator, one of the first things I want to do is begin to use the leverage that we have as the federal government to withhold federal funding to states that are participating in being a sanctuary state and facilitating sanctuary cities, and bring them to justice through the Department of Justice. We need to clean house in the Department of Justice and the Department of Homeland Security, in the FBI. There's a tremendous amount. I could spend an entire show talking to you about the corruption in these organizations and how we need to clean house. If I may, I'd also like to talk about how food shortages are now a national security issue.
Well, let me ask you this question, Denice, if you will. If you're just tuning into Politics in the Pulpit, we're talking to Denice Gary-Pandol, who is running for U.S. Senate here in the state of California. As you're driving up and down the state, especially in the middle of our state, the San Joaquin Valley, people can see these makeshift signs that say, give us our water, don't make Central California the new Dust Bowl. What could you do to alleviate our farmers in the Central Valley that give us so much of the produce, not only for our own state, but really that produce it for across the nation?
Thank you, Jerry, for that question. So that's exactly what I wanted to touch on next. So this is a national security issue because of food shortages. And one of the first things I'd like to do in Washington is get proposed legislation that will mandate water infrastructure. So the taxpayers of California have spent $30 billion, Jerry, over the last 25 years passing 10 water bond issues. Think about that. 10 water bond issues over the last quarter century have been passed by the taxpayers of California, and we haven't built one bit of water infrastructure. We haven't built a dam since the 1980s. And so farmers in California are going bankrupt. Ranchers are having to sell the food we eat, the livestock, right? They're having to sell their livestock to other people in other states, literally, or kill livestock. So we have this beautiful golden state that provides over 500 commodities that feed the people of this country and that feed the world, and they're going out of business. So think about this, Jerry. We provide the people of California, the farmers and producers of California, provide over 2/3 of all the fruit and nuts that we eat, not just in the Golden State, but around the nation, around the globe. We provide almost half the vegetables that we eat in our state and in our nation and worldwide. Now, when you keep putting those people out of business because the Democrats in Sacramento keep turning off the water, and I was in the Kern County, I went to the Kern County Water Summit because I live here in ag and oil country, here in the San Joaquin Valley. This is where I live. And the Democrats from Sacramento came down and they told us all here in the valley that they're going to turn off our water some more.
Yeah. Now let me ask you this question real quick, Denice. Go ahead and finish that thought.
So what happens is we have these food shortages, and then on top of that, we don't have enough Republicans in the U.S. Senate to make it illegal for China or Bill Gates or other hostile entities to come in and buy up our farmland.
Yeah.
So we absolutely have to get legislation passed in Washington that will mandate water infrastructure, and not just here in our state, but across the country, and will prevent these foreign businesses and entities from coming into our country and into California and buying up our real estate, buying up our farmland, buying up our vineyards so that they can have control over the water supply and over our food supply. Because let me tell your audience, Jerry, whoever controls the water is going to control food supply, and whoever controls the food supply is going to control the population. This is a big deal.
Yeah.
It's also going to lower the price of food, Jerry. So Denice, as your U.S. Senator, wants to lower the price of food. It's a pocketbook issue. It's a national security issue. It's a pocketbook issue. Can we talk about energy for a moment?
Let me ask you a question before we get into energy, because I want to kind of leave that for the next segment. What has the response been to your grassroots campaign by Californians across the state as you've been traveling?
I have Democrats and independents that say, I'm going to take your business card into the polling booth because I want to see your name. I need to make sure I remember your name, because farmers that are Democrats can't afford. They don't want to lose their family business. That family farm sometimes has been part of that family for generations. They don't want to lose it.
We got 2 minutes here before the next break, Denice. Real quickly, if you can do this in 1 minute before we carry you over, why is a right and correct perspective on the Middle East important for the next senator from California?
Because it's all about keeping Americans safe here at home and abroad. It's all about the oil supply. You know, we've got to talk to your audience about what it means, since California is importing most of its oil and gas from Saudi Arabia and Iraq. Why is that meaningful to Californians? Why is this a pocketbook issue? Why is it an environmental issue? Why is it a national security issue? Let's talk about that when we come back.
Yeah, when we come back, Denice Gary-Pandol is joining us. She's running for U.S. Senator here in the great Golden State of California, and she desires to be sent to Washington on our behalf. And so when we come back here on Politics in the Pulpit, we'll ask her a few more questions and then see if you guys can help donate and volunteer for her campaign on Politics in the Pulpit. All right, we're back here live on Politics in the Pulpit. This is our final segment today. If you're just joining us, we have joining the show today by phone, Denice Gary-Pandol, who is running for U.S. Senate here in California in a race between three Democrats and another Republican and a Rhino Republican by the name of Steve Garvey. And we'll see what happens there. But I had the privilege of meeting Denice yesterday, and she is a charming lady, and so wanted the opportunity for you guys to hear her vision for the state of California. And when we left off on a really important topic, and that is gas and oil here in California. I was just telling Denice that gas prices have just skyrocketed again in just the last couple of days, and I'm sure that has something to do with the oatmeal brains in Washington, the President of the United States. But Denice, talk a little bit about why we're paying on average over $4 when you can go to the state of Wyoming and it's $2.25 a gallon.
All right. Well, first of all, let me say this. I am the only candidate that has a vision on what exactly we need to do to end the inflationary price of gasoline and certainly oil, gas, and coal. The way to end inflation and the inflationary price on this product is to protect and expand oil, gas, and coal in America. And that's legislation that also has to get passed. One of the problems here in the state of California is every time you put a gallon of gas in your car, you're giving most of that money to the state of California. So the taxes in the state must be cut on the price of fuel. And, of course, we can do that. We can mandate that in Washington through legislation because federal law trumps state law. But at any rate, in order to lower the price of fuel, as well as make fuel an environmentally friendly issue here in our state and in our nation, but also as a national security issue, we have to get legislation proposed that will protect and expand the oil, gas, and coal industry. We also need to go into the nuclear industry as well. By the way, it is so clean, it is so safe, it is so cheap. And that would be very effective also in terms of our electric bills. But let me just tell your audience a few things. So first of all, the only reliable source of energy that can ramp up and ramp down an electric grid is oil, gas, and coal. And the reason why I say it's so environmentally friendly to not import oil and gas from Saudi Arabia and Iraq, which is where most of it comes from here in our state, is because an oil tanker is a dirty business. So that those oil tankers that run through the Strait of Hormuz and come down to California are dirty, nasty things. And we here in our beautiful state actually produce it more cleanly than any other nation state on the planet. So if you're a Democrat and you're listening to Jerry Cook's show today, you ought to be thinking about the fact that if we produce it right here in California, we can produce it more inexpensively and more cleanly than Saudi Arabia, Iraq, Canada, Mexico, or any other country. In addition to that, it would bring down the price because, of course, we're not importing the fuel. And, of course, if we can get Denice Gary-Pandol, the only candidate, by the way, who talks about getting legislation passed to protect and expand oil, gas, and coal, we can bring a boom to California. In other words, we can lift people out of poverty because when you think about it, you know, this state, by producing it right here, can, of course, bring billions of dollars into direct annual revenue to this state. I'm talking right here in Kern County alone, direct annual revenue would be about $9.2 billion. Right here in Kern County where I live, it would bring an additional 10,000 jobs. Oil and gas output creates millions of jobs, indirect jobs, and of course enhances the economy of our state. And so this is a big deal. And when you think about it, the fact that we have an unelected, what I'm going to call the fourth branch of government, which is unconstitutional, it's called bureaucrats. So what you need is you need Denice Gary-Pandol. By the way, that Rhino Garvey or Early that jumped into this race late, neither of them seem to have a clue that if we got rid of NEPA, the National Environmental Policy Act that was passed in 1970, we would begin to deregulate our economy. So if you want to cut spending and be able to make life affordable in California, you've got to deregulate the oil, gas, and coal and nuclear industries here in California and across the country. But let's talk about why it's a national security issue. The state of California has over 30 military bases. Camp Pendleton is the second largest. I believe 29 Palms is the largest Marine Corps base in the country, and I think Camp Pendleton is a close second. We're not going to be able to get our fighter jets off the ground if there's a war initiated by China or Iran or Russia. So, and by the way, California is the first sort of state of contact, between the United States and China. So, China will certainly face Hawaii, but California is next, and of course there's Alaska. So we really need to be able to supply our troops with what they need. And by the way, the United States military, 80% of it runs on oil, gas, and coal, just so everybody knows.
Yeah.
And the Biden administration and the Democrats have got the strategic petroleum reserve down to about 17 days worth of fuel in it left. Think about that.
Yeah.
We've got emergency fuel levels at about 17 days worth. So we absolutely need to retake the United States Senate, and not with a rhino and not with some guy that doesn't know what he's doing. We need to get Denice Gary-Pandol in there who knows what to do and can get legislation proposed and passed. And I don't think I'm going to have trouble getting Ted Cruz from Texas and Tom Cotton and Marsha Blackburn and Senator Tuberville and Senator Hawley, Josh Hawley, and others that will work with me to get this legislation passed, because they know that's going to end inflation.
How can folks donate? How can folks donate and volunteer for your campaign?
GoPandol.com. Go to GoPandol, PANDOL.com. GoPandol.com. Oil, gas, and coal is a national security issue. It's a pocketbook issue. It's an environmental issue. Let's fix it.
Well, Denice
the United States Senate.
Well, Denice Gary-Pandol, we promise to have you back on before the March 5th primary, as you have a wealth of knowledge to share with our California audience out there. And so thank you very much for calling in today, and it was again a pleasure to meet you yesterday, and looking forward to another conversation here in a couple weeks, and the best of luck to you as we get into the primary.
Pastor Jerry Cook, thank you so very much. It was just an honor being on your show today, and you just have a blessed and great day. Thank you.
All right. Thank you so much, Denice. If you are listening in today, I'd encourage you to check out Denice Gary-Pandol and check out our website. We'll see you next week here on Politics in the Pulpit on your hometown station.